if I told you that the most secure prison in the world was outsmarted, not by brute force, but by pure genius? No one had ever escaped Alcatraz until one man did the impossible. A plan so daring, so flawless that even today no one knows if he lived or died. But here's the real question. Did he actually make it to freedom? Or did the waters of San Francisco Bay swallow him whole? Stay with me, because this story is about to take a turn you won't believe. Dear listeners, before we move forward, please subscribe my channel to hit 1,000 figure. Alcatraz wasn't just a prison, it was a fortress. A cold, isolated rock in the middle of the San Francisco Bay, surrounded by raging waters and brutal currents. No one had ever escaped. No one was supposed to. And yet, Clint Eastwood knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to die here. For years, Alcatraz had been known as the inescapable prison, housing the most dangerous criminals in America. The guards were ruthless, the cells were like cages, and every attempt at escape had ended in failure or death. But Clint wasn't like the others. He wasn't just smart, he was a genius. A man who could see the cracks in an unbreakable system. Every night, as the prison went silent, Clint lay awake, listening, studying the movements of the guards, the shift changes, the weak spots in security. He knew that brute force wouldn't work. This had to be precise, clever, flawless. And so, the plan began. A plan so bold, so impossible that if he failed, he'd never see daylight again. Escape from Alcatraz wasn't just about getting out. It was about making the guards believe he was still inside long after he was gone. That was the difference between freedom and being gunned down before reaching the water. Clint Eastwood knew that time was his greatest enemy. Every morning, the guards counted every inmate, and if they saw an empty bed, the entire prison would go on lockdown. So, Clint and his two partners in escape, the Anglin brothers, created a plan that was both simple and genius. They would leave fake heads in their beds, made out of papier-mâché, soap, and real human hair they had stolen from the prison barbershop. The idea was crazy enough to work. Each night, under the dim prison lights, they carefully sculpted the heads, making sure they looked real enough to fool a sleepy guard doing a routine check. But deception alone wouldn't set them free. They needed a way out. Clint had spent weeks loosening the vent grills at the back of their cells, scraping away at the concrete using homemade tools, a spoon, a nail clipper, and stolen drill bits from the prison workshop. Each night, they worked inch by inch, careful not to make a sound. By the time they were ready, each of them had a hole just big enough to crawl through. On the outside, it looked like another ordinary night in Alcatraz. But tonight was the night. Clint took one last look at his cell, at the fake head resting on his pillow, at the bars that had caged him for years. Then he took a deep breath and slipped into the darkness. Crawling through the narrow, dust-filled passage behind his cell, Clint Eastwood could feel his heart pounding, but his hands were steady. He had prepared for this moment for months. There was no turning back now. The air was thick with the stench of rust and damp concrete. Every movement had to be slow, precise, and silent. The metal pipes lining the walls were cold against his skin as he carefully navigated through the maze-like interior of Alcatraz. Ahead of him, the Anglin brothers were already making their way up to the prison's utility corridor, a forgotten space above the cells, hidden from the guards' view. It was the perfect blind spot. For years, prisoners had believed Alcatraz was inescapable, but that's because no one had been smart enough to think beyond the walls. Clint had studied every inch of the prison, knowing that brute force wouldn't get him out. It had to be methodical, quiet, and most importantly, undetected. He reached the utility corridor, hoisting himself up, his muscles burning from the tension. Below them, the guards patrolled, oblivious to the fact that 3 men were moving toward freedom just above their heads. Now came the most dangerous part, getting onto the roof. One wrong step, one creaky panel, and the entire prison would be on high alert. Clint signaled to the brothers. It was time. With slow, careful movements, they began their final climb toward the night sky. As Clint Eastwood pulled himself onto the rooftop of Alcatraz, the cold night air hit him like a wave. This was it, the point of no return. Below, the prison yard stretched out in eerie silence. Guards patrolled with rifles, their boots echoing against the pavement. The spotlights swept across the yard in slow, rhythmic motions. Miss a timing, and they'd be dead men. Clint signaled to the Anglin brothers, and they crouched low, moving carefully across the roof. The wind howled, rattling the metal structures around them. Every step was a gamble. One misplaced foot, one sound too loud, and they'd be spotted. Ahead of them, a drain pipe ran down the side of the building, leading to the outer fence. That was their way down. But as Clint approached the edge, he spotted something that froze him in place. A guard had stopped just beneath them, lighting a cigarette. Time slowed. The glow of the lighter illuminated the man's face as he took a slow drag. If he looked up, even for a second, it was over. Clint held his breath, his mind racing. A minute passed, then another. Finally, the guard tossed the cigarette, muttered something under his breath, and walked away. Clint exhaled. They had seconds to move. One by one, they climbed down the drain pipe, landing just outside the main security fence. Beyond that, the open water, the final obstacle. Clint turned to the others, his voice low but firm. "Let's move." Because once they hit the waves, there was no turning back. Clint Eastwood and the Anglin brothers stood at the edge of Alcatraz, staring into the cold, merciless waters of the San Francisco Bay. The tide was strong, the waves crashing against the rocky shore, with a force that had drowned every man who had ever tried to escape before them. But failure wasn't an option. Hidden near the shoreline was their secret weapon, a makeshift raft built from stolen raincoats, stitched together with prison glue and held together by sheer determination. It wasn't perfect, but it was all they had. Clint ran his hands over the material, checking for leaks. It would have to hold. The guards were still behind them, somewhere on the roof, still believing that every prisoner was in their cell, sleeping peacefully. But it wouldn't last. By sunrise, they'd realize the truth. And when they did, the entire island would go on lockdown. "Time to go," Clint muttered. With that, they pushed the raft into the churning waters, the icy cold immediately biting into their skin. The waves pulled at them, threatened to drag them under, but they paddled forward, driven by sheer willpower. As they drifted farther from the island, Clint looked back one last time. The great Alcatraz stood in the distance, its walls still unbroken, its legend still intact. But for the first time in history, men had outsmarted the rock. The raft disappeared into the darkness, swallowed by the vast, unforgiving sea. No bodies were ever found. No traces of them ever surfaced. To this day, their fate remains one of the greatest unsolved mysteries of all time. Did they make it? Or did the waters claim them, like so many before? No one knows for sure. But if anyone could pull off the impossible, it was Clint Eastwood's